Part 18. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 174. A feeling of being a bitch kept stirring in Sudbai's heart. In order to attract him, this old immortal ghost actually lowered his face and pretended to be a Lolita here? Actually, it's not necessary. Sudbai is not the kind of uncle who likes to take little Lolita home to see goldfish. As long as the other party tells her about his parents, he will definitely come over. There is no need to be so shameless. The previous he and oh and hey gestures, and the cooing gestures, now peeled off the disguise to reveal the true appearance of a dead old woman. This change is indeed a bit too shocking. At the same time, a strong mental force swept over. When the old woman's painting style changed, Sudbai had already subconsciously put his hands on his waist and was about to get the Hellfire shotgun. But at this moment, he felt as if his brain had been hit hard, and his whole body was spinning all of a sudden. He knelt on the ground, supporting the ground with his hands, and blood began to overflow from his eyes, ears, and nostrils. At this time, Sudbai's mind seemed to have a hurricane, stirring everything upside down. Sudbai's face had become distorted due to the huge pain. Sophia froze aside, and two vines immediately stretched out. Go away, and when I deal with this enemy, I will give you a blessing. Also, no one else is allowed to come near here, I keep my word. The old woman's voice sounded in Sophia's mind. Sophia hesitated and hesitated. After taking one last look at Sudbai, she nodded, stepped back, and left the glass house. The ability of this brain may really be small, otherwise it would not have been detained here for so many years, so its harm scope has been obviously reduced. The other one, if it attacks Sudbai, he will die at most. If she didn't save him, it wasn't because she had captured Sudbai by force, but because Sudbai had done it on her own. She had no causal connection whatsoever. In addition, with the good fortune promised by the old woman, Sophia felt that she had no reason not to agree. What's wrong with him? Edward asked anxiously, looking at Sudbai who was kneeling on the ground with a painful look on his face. He couldn't stand Sudbai, but as a doctor, Edward's medical ethics were still very high. Sorry, this place has been completely taken over by our department now. Sophia's eyes swept across all the security personnel present, clapped her hands, and shouted. Martial law. Yes. All security personnel went a step further and completely isolated the glass house, and no scientific researchers were allowed to approach. Sophia, I am going to appeal, I am going to complain against you, you are abusing public power, you. Sophia put her hand on Edward's face, and the fragrance of pollen came, and Edward immediately became weak and passed out. Countless times, Sudbai wanted to raise his spirit and attention to control his body, to pull out a gun, to blow up the damn thing in front of him, but every time he tried to raise his spirit and consciousness, he would be ruthlessly beaten. The ground was scattered, and I tried my best but failed again and again. At the same time, the pain is increasing, as if the soul is about to be torn apart. The torture your father gave me back then is really just a drop in the bucket compared to what you are enduring now. The old woman's voice sounded like an avenger. The more Sudbai suffered, the happier and more excited she became. A smile appeared at the corner of Sudbai's mouth, because the severe pain caused his teeth to bite his lip, and blood flowed out, but his body was changing. Hey, is there another kind of power in your body? Haha. You still underestimate me. Do you think you can switch to another bloodline under my suppression? As soon as the zombie's aura emerged, it was ruthlessly snuffed out. Sudbai let out a howl, and his teeth were bloodshot. Haha, stop holding on, die sooner, and be freed sooner, right? Roll. The veins on Sudbai's neck were exposed, and he stood up suddenly. However, the tearing feeling in his soul made him dizzy at the next moment, and he knelt on the ground again. You can't get up, GG. Both fists were clenched tightly at this time, and the nails pierced into the flesh of the palms, but Subai felt no pain at all. This was a complete crushing of the spiritual system, a crazy squeezing that ignored the physical body. Hello, Sophia connected the communication. Did you see it? Judging from the real-time broadcast situation, he won't be able to hold on much longer. We'll arrive in 15 minutes. Do you think it's still too late? Zolun's voice came through the communicator. It's probably too late. Edward said that each time this thing wakes up, it only takes half an hour. Now there are less than 5 minutes left. That thing probably wants to continue torturing Sue for a while, and will kill Sue completely at the last moment. It's such a pity that I couldn't witness this process with my own eyes. By the way, Sophia, please write a more detailed investigation report after the incident. I see. Sophia hung up the call and stood quietly with her arms folded, looking at Subai's painful appearance in the glass room. She didn't know why, but seeing this man struggling to stand up again and again made her pupils feel like they were being stabbed. Feeling of pain. Subai's vision began to blur, and everything in front of him began to become less real, as if he had become a transparent person, as if he no longer existed at all. Your own body, your own soul, your own consciousness. Everything about myself will completely disappear. It is an end that is completely erased. But Subai was powerless against everything in front of him. Gradually, Subai's body began to lose strength. He was no longer kneeling on the ground, but lying on the ground. His eyes were wandering and his lips were pursed. His whole body almost turned into a vegetative state. Gigi, you can wait slowly now and slowly taste the feeling of death. If it weren't for the fact that I still need to sleep, I really want to torture you for 100 years. Subai now has an idea in his mind, that is, if it was really his father who left this thing in this laboratory, why not add insurance to it or take some further measures? It's good now. His son has become like this. Everyone else is cheating, so how come you are cheating here? It has to be said that when he was about to die and his consciousness was almost drifting out, this kind of thought actually appeared in Subai's mind. It is true that the thinking mode of a mental patient is not something that ordinary people can understand. Hotel room. After Subai left, the little guy would watch TV with the remote control in the guest room. Jixiang usually helped him choose the program. When he chose the anime he liked, the little guy would clap his hands, then take the remote control and hold it in his arms. Jixiang also dotes on the little guy. He goes to check the air conditioner temperature from time to time and brings some snacks and drinks to the little guy from time to time. At this moment, Jixiang seemed to suddenly notice something, jumped off the sofa and stood on the balcony. Jixiang has been with Subai for a long time. Jixiang is very sensitive to Subai's aura and can tell it quickly. He can sense that the aura is getting weaker and weaker, and it has even been weakened very quickly. It became a feeling of dying. Jixiang seemed indifferent to this. He just silently faced the wind blowing from the balcony of the high-rise building, licked his paws and combed his hair. Jixiang doesn't have much affection for Subai, and it doesn't follow Subai because Subai is its owner. In fact, from the beginning, it treats Subai as a passerby, a temporary residence after Lizzie leaves. Lychee will come back, but it will take a little longer. Jixiang firmly believes in this. If you die, just die. Without you. It's also quite good, it saves you the trouble of being nervous and messing around. Obviously, Jixiang was still very concerned about Subai's kidnapping of Chu Zhao and throwing him into the house. It knew about the existence of terrorist broadcasts. After all, it was a pet that had been following Lychee, and it also knew that it had something to do with real tasks. What a risk it is to bring someone involved into your home. How can a person like this take care of children? He can only bring danger to children. He is an irresponsible person and a psychopath, which is very detrimental to the growth and future of the child. If you die, just die. Die clean. Ji Xiang looked at himself at the glass window with great satisfaction, and then walked back to the living room with an elegant catwalk. Then, Jixiang was stunned. He saw that the little guy climbed down from the sofa for some reason, and with his two little fleshy hands, he took down the wallet that Subai had placed on the coffee table. The wallet fell to the ground and fell to the ground. In front of the little guy, there were many cards inside, but in the most conspicuous position was Subai's ID card. Seeing Subai's photo, the little guy was very happy. He pointed at his ID card with his little finger, and his mouth no longer said the childish words "ye ya ya yo," but read out very difficultly and obscurely. "Baba, Baba." Ji Xiang on the side felt like he was shocked by electricity. He lay on the ground in a grieved manner, covering his eyes with his two paws. The first word it said was not cat, but daddy. Why? He was obviously taking care of the child, but that guy was just a hands-off shopkeeper and threw a chicken drumstick to the child while he was eating and let him crawl on the table. "Papa, Papa, Papa." The little guy kept pointing at his ID card and shouting. Ji Xiang slowly got up and looked at the happy little guy. He shook his head helplessly, looking like he was hopeless. Subsequently, Ji Xiang returned to the balcony. He turned his head and looked at the little guy again, with a touch of kindness. Then, Ji Xiang's eyes became serious and gloomy. Then, it jumped onto the balcony railing. A black shadow continued to enlarge from its body, and a breath belonging to that woman rose up at this time. Today, all the British listeners are trembling in their hearts, because they once again recalled their fear of being dominated by this woman. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 176. It's too late to hurry up and hurry up. Sir, the time is too short, and the Edward Institute of Psychology is also relatively remote. The helicopter pilot said to Zolun, who was sitting in the back. Just try your best. After all, I still need to deal with this kind of thing, and I don't expect to be able to catch up. Zolun was sitting in the helicopter. The wind was howling around him, but he seemed very indifferent. There was even an invisible barrier that separated him from the outside. No matter how strong the wind was, his hairstyle was meticulous. He was indeed a right person. A person who has a very strict dress code, which is almost an obsession and hobby. Next to Zolun, there was a man sitting. The man was a bit older, he looked to be 40 years old. He was wearing greasy overalls and looked like a worker in a workshop. These two people sit together, showing a great visual contrast. But the two of them seemed very natural. Indeed, perhaps the secular world attaches great importance to the relationship between status and status, especially in Western democracies that emphasize freedom, democracy, equality, and chant these slogans. In fact, to a certain extent, their hierarchical class thinking is more obvious. However, once they enter after entering the story world of horror broadcasts, status in the real world is often no longer the standard by which listeners measure each other. The only criterion is strength. Being able to sit with Sophia's boss Zolun, and even occupying most of the positions with great dignity, it is obvious that the status of this European and American worker can only be higher than Zolun, and definitely not lower than Zolun. This is still an adventure. The worker's voice seemed a bit thick, probably a habit developed in a noisy working environment, because if the voice was not loud, it would be impossible to have a conversation in the workshop. Once it is not done well, the scene will happen again. Do you really believe that he will have a deep relationship with that woman? Even if the cat follows him, it doesn't explain too many problems. In fact, judging from other people's analysis, everyone actually doesn't know that woman. The view that has disappeared is more consistent, and the recently collected intelligence also illustrates these issues. That woman is probably no longer in the real world. If the woman has disappeared and the black cat followed him, it is easy to understand. It is nothing more than a lucky listener in the Eastern Circle who was lucky enough to adopt a pet of a strong man. This example, in our West, there are many sides, even in fairy tales. Chiao Allen, don't think too much. Even if he is dead now, he has nothing to do with us. He went to the laboratory on his own initiative and walked into the glass house on his own initiative. We did not escort him there. Besides, we, the London audience, always have to get over the shadow of that woman, and we cannot remain immersed in the nightmare of the past. Nightmare? Shadow. Hee. Chiao Allen sighed, I am from Sailor City. My wife and daughter left me forever in that incident. Even the slightest trace of them was ruthlessly erased by the terrorist broadcast. It is impossible to find a piece of their hair to pay homage to. If that woman hadn't disappeared, if that woman was still watching everything here. If her relationship with him is really extraordinary. So, the possible consequences of this. Zolun, can you afford it? If that woman comes to England again, you can guarantee that the one in the Vatican, the one in Milan and the one in Catalonia, those giants are really willing to fight against that crazy woman at the cost of their own resources. What? Britain still needs to be protected by us British people. We can't count on anyone else, never. Only we British listeners regard this place as our home from the bottom of our hearts. We had already been tricked by others into provoking that woman, now do we want to take the initiative to repeat the same mistake? Zolun reached out and patted Chiao Allen on the shoulder, my dear Chiao Allen, please believe me, that woman is really gone. We must learn to stand up again. Only by standing up again can we all walk out without that shadow, our British audience can have hope, and only then can another giant be born. This is just our first step. Now, the man named Sue is our first step and the pathfinder. His accident has nothing to do with us. At this moment, a terrifying aura rose up in the center of London without any sign or warning. It came so unexpectedly. Zolun's expression immediately changed, and his hands began to tremble uncontrollably. The previous confident look completely disappeared, and turned into a kind of panic and fear, like a rat in a laboratory that was frightened by various experiments. Her breath, she is here, she is still. Chiao Allen's lips had turned purple. Obviously, the fear deep in his soul completely suppressed the hatred of his wife and daughter being killed, as if the being at the top of the food chain was naturally suppressing the pigs below. He couldn't hate that woman, and he didn't dare to hate her. She had planted a nightmare in his heart that he couldn't get rid of. In a museum in London, a coffin that was originally placed in a special exhibition area that was prohibited from visiting guests slowly floated up. A skinny man stretched out his hand, grabbed the edge of the coffin, and then slowly sat up. His hair was blue, but it was like a pile of dead grass. His skin was so wrinkled that it was like a fig leaf attached to his bones, which looked very forced. However, his eyes seemed very deep and hollow. When he sat up, the air pressure around him suddenly dropped, and everything began to center on him. He is hesitating, he is thinking, he is hesitating. He didn't even dare to release his breath completely to meet the breath that appeared out of thin air. Finally, he let out a long sigh, and his whole body showed a sense of loneliness. Then, he slowly lay back in the coffin. The lid of the coffin was also closed at this time, and slowly fell back to the ground. Sir, the Prime Minister asked me to ask you if he has prepared the outline for the next military and security meeting. A clerk knocked on the door and asked, because the door was locked from the inside. This is a very strange phenomenon. Very few people lock their doors here. The clerk, who never got a response, had to reach out and continue knocking on the door. However, an angry response soon came from inside. To hell with the Prime Minister, to hell with the draft outline, to hell with everyone here. Get out of here, get out of here. The roar echoed on this floor of the government building, surprising everyone. Why was the Prime Minister's most trusted assistant, who was always known for his gentleness, suddenly so angry? In the office, Will was squatting beside his desk. He looked at his hands. He was shaking. He was really shaking. For a lot of time before, he had imagined countless times that one day that woman would dare to come to England again. How will he face her, fight her, defeat her? In order to protect his country and his homeland, he will do anything, even sacrifice. However, when the matter came to an end, his courage disappeared in an instant when the woman's breath appeared again in the sky over London. He was angry at his own cowardice, and now, all he had left was anger. Zolun is right. If the British audience cannot get out of the shadow left by that woman, the future will be extremely slim because they have lost their courage and the courage to face it. At the same time, a huge figure appeared in the sky above the Vatican, Milan, Catalonia, Athens, and other cities, and their eyes were all pointed in the direction of Britain. Even in China, there are huge figures appearing above several cities. The figure is very blurry and invisible to ordinary people, but it can interfere with the magnetic field to a great extent. A figure expressed surprise. Didn't she already go to that place? Why, has she come back? Sophia suddenly fell to the ground, gasping for air. That breath, the breath she felt when she was just an experiencer, appeared again. She remembered the fear of a city being wiped out the day after that aura appeared, as if her worldview had been completely subverted, and she spent a long time in a state of confusion. The hundreds of thousands of people in Sailor City, their social relationships, all traces of them, and their existence for so long have been completely wiped out. This is a great terror, this is a great fear, this it is a dark curtain hanging over the heads of all British listeners. Immediately, she suddenly raised her head and saw the dying Subai in the glass house. She screamed like crazy. More than a dozen vines grew wildly from her body, penetrated from the doorway, and waved directly towards the cultivator. Dish. Can't let him die, absolutely can't let him die. That woman is still there. That woman is here again. He must have a deep relationship with that woman. He can't die, he can't die. Subai only heard the old woman's voice in his mind suddenly scream, and then the mental pressure on him dissipated instantly. Snapped. The sound of breaking glass came, and Subai felt a dampness on his face. He raised his head and opened his eyes. He saw that the petri dish fell to the ground and shattered, the culture fluid was splashed everywhere, and the brain was scroll and come to yourself. Do not know why. Look at this disgusting brain. Subai's first reaction was swallowed. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 177. Nahua, people in Jiangsu and Zhejiang don't eat a lot of it. The cuisine there is more focused on lightness and the food is more refined. It's a bit like a 17 or 18 girl holding a red tooth racket and singing about the dawn wind and the waning moon on the willow bank. Nahua is in Sichuan. It is a very popular food over there. After all, Sichuan food is like a big man from Kansai holding an iron chariot and singing about the great rivers heading east. It is a bit rougher. Take a portion of brain slices, bake or boil them, sprinkle with minced garlic, coriander and other condiments before eating, and mix well. It is a must-have delicacy in Sichuan food stalls. Only the brain in front of Subai. It's a bit big, after all, it's not a pig brain, but a human brain. Moreover, not to mention it was cooked, there was not even a bowl of minced garlic. Moreover, this brain has been placed in a petri dish for more than 10 years. It is probably past its shelf life. There may even be many chemicals in the petri dish that are much more powerful than preservatives. However, Subai still couldn't restrain his saliva. He thinks. So hungry. This kind of hunger is not the hunger of one's own body, but the hunger coming from the brain, the hunger at the soul level, the hunger at the spiritual level, as if the soul has been hollowed out and now urgently needs to be replenished. Eat whatever you want to replenish yourself, and the best way to replenish your body, is to swallow this white mess in front of you. To be honest, Subai refused, but it seemed that he was tormented by the old woman. Subai was now extremely weak in soul and spirit, and the urge to pounce on food was constantly strengthening in Subai's consciousness. This is an instinct, the most primitive instinct deep in the human heart. Finally, outside the glass house, among all the security personnel and scientific researchers and Sophia's stunned eyes, Subai picked up the human brain and said, "Eat it one bite at a time." He ate very sweetly. "It's like eating a delicious white ice cream." The little guy continued to wave Subai's ID card while watching TV, and murmured, "Daddy, Daddy." Obviously, the little guy was very excited that he finally learned to speak, and wanted to practice more. Practice, wait for Subai to come back and call him. After shouting for countless times, the little guy felt a little thirsty, and then he realized that the kitten didn't get milk for him. His little eyes wandered around, and he finally saw Ji Xiang curled up on the balcony. The little guy's mouth opened into an O shape, and he immediately climbed down from the sofa, climbed to the balcony, and climbed to Ji Xiang's side. Ji Xiang had his eyes closed now, very weak, curled up there without even opening his eyes. Obviously, the previous imitation of the scent of lychee was a huge drain on it. It was originally unwilling to do this for Subai, either from an emotional perspective or from its own ability. But seeing the little guy holding Subai's ID card and shouting "Daddy," he still chose to do it. Ji Xiang is so weak now that he probably can't even beat the night owls on the street. The little guy stroked Ji Xiang's head with his little fleshy hand, then lowered his face and rubbed it against Ji Xiang's body. Seeing that Ji Xiang still couldn't get up and continued to be half asleep and half awake, the little guy crawled off the balcony. He climbed into the bedroom again, put a carton of milk in front of himself, and pushed the milk as he climbed, thus pushing the milk from the bedroom to the balcony of the living room. First, he used his teeth to bite a small hole in the milk. Then the little guy knelt down on the ground with difficulty and pointed the hole towards Ji Xiang's mouth. At this time, the door rang. Subai opened the door and staggered in like a drunken man. Then he fell down on the carpet and fell asleep directly, like a drunken man. The drunkard was already unconscious. The little guy hummed and crawled over again, pushed the door shut first, then crawled to the bedroom to get a bag of milk, pushed it to Subai's side, bit a hole first, and then stuffed it into Subai's mouth. Subai felt his mouth was dry and he immediately started sucking. Just like this, the little guy looked at Ji Xiang for a while, and then crawled to look at Subai, busy and crawling around. After Sophia sent Subai to the hotel, she did not follow him, but returned to the car. Her heart could not calm down at all. In fact, she was really afraid that when she read the news and newspapers tomorrow, she would find someone in a certain city. The news has disappeared. In fact, at this time, if she could muster up the courage to follow Subai, who was already a little unconscious, into the hotel and into the room, and see the almost collapsed Ji Xiang with only half a life left, she would probably understand everything. But when Ji Xiang simulated the scent of lychee, the powerful audience here in the UK were all frightened. In the end, no one even came forward. Sophia, who was still barely considered a party, had to take over the mess and put Subai scent back. In the interpretation novel, the fundamental reason why Zhuliang's empty city plan was successful was because Zhuliang's great reputation for his previous plans, which made his enemies frightened, was also because Li Ji had been here before and wiped out a city to the end. He actually managed to survive the punishment of the horrific broadcast. The nightmare caused by this incident is still vivid in the minds of listeners here in the UK. He didn't know how long he had been asleep, but Subai was woken up by the constant knocking on the door. He opened his eyes, and then suddenly felt nauseated. He got up, rushed into the bathroom, and vomited. In fact, I couldn't spit out anything, but the disgusting feeling was still lingering in my mind. This was the feeling when swallowing that human brain. Nausea, extremely nausea, very disgusting, but at that time Subai felt even though I knew it was disgusting and nauseating, I didn't know why I was crazy, but I still ate it happily every bite. Subai knelt down and sat in the bathroom, feeling a difference between his mind and body. His perception and observation of the surroundings had entered a mode that he was not used to due to his modesty. Everything seems to have become more delicate and clearer, and the surrounding things seem to have become coherent and can be grasped clearly, as if a person with severe myopia suddenly put on glasses, and the lenses were placed on the glasses. On the way, the world around me suddenly became clear and I started to feel dizzy. The knocking on the door continued and became louder and louder. Subai stood up and staggered over. When he touched the keypad to open the door, he touched it twice but failed to get it right. Only the third time did he touch the door correctly. When he opened it, Sunur was standing outside with an anxious look on his face. "Subai, where have you been these past 3 days? Yesterday I started calling you and you turned off your phone. I knocked on your door several times but no one responded. Then I used the embassy's relationship to retrieve the video from the hotel. I just realized that you didn't go out when you came back that day. Did you know that if you didn't open the door just now, I would call the people in the hotel to force the door to open?" Sunur was very excited and spoke very fast. Subai touched his forehead and said, "I feel a little uncomfortable." "What's wrong?" "I'll take you to the hospital." "No, I'll sleep a little longer." After saying that, Subai stumbled back to the bedroom, and then fell directly on the bed. Seeing that Subai was fine, Sunur was relieved. At this time, she saw the little guy lying on the sofa with Jixiang. The little guy was holding Jixiang's head and stroking it constantly. Just like Subai, he was still dizzy now, waking up from time to time but immediately falling asleep again. "What have you been eating lately?" Sunur walked up to the little guy and asked pityingly. She really felt that Subai was very irresponsible. She took care of the children seriously. She was as hungover as drunk, so she just left the child here? The little guy looked at Sunur with watery eyes, then climbed off the sofa and went to the refrigerator in the guest room. He opened the refrigerator and took out some food from it with great familiarity, then placed it in front of him and crawled to push it to Sunur. "In front of my son." "Ah, ah, ah, yeah, yo." The little guy pointed his finger at his mouth, meaning Sunur, "You can eat this if you are hungry." Sunur couldn't laugh or cry for a while. "Is this really Subai's son? How old are you and your IQ is so high?" He didn't know how long he slept again. After Subai felt that his soul and body had been reintegrated, he slowly opened his eyes and couldn't help but stretch on the bed. "Comfortable, very comfortable, the world seems to be closer to me, and even the feeling of air entering the lungs when breathing is more refreshing. This is the benefit of eating that brain. Although I felt uncomfortable for a while, the initial effects are already so obvious. Correspondingly, my reaction ability and mental and soul level should also be improved to a certain extent." However, Subai later discovered that all of his clothes had been changed, and now he was actually wearing pajamas. After getting out of bed, Subai saw the little guy sitting on the sofa watching cartoons. Ji Xiang also seemed a little lackluster, but he still lay on the little guy's body and watched TV with him. There was a delicious aroma coming from the kitchen, and the dining table was already filled with many delicious dishes. The room Subai opened was of course impossible to treat him badly. There is no presidential suite in this hotel, but it is located in the main city of London, and the room is very large, with 3 bedrooms and 1 living room, a study, a bedroom, and a side bedroom, and tableware in the kitchen. The food and other condiments are also kept fresh. After all, young Master Su is not short of money. Suner walked out of the kitchen carrying a large bowl of soup. She was wearing an apron and looked like a housewife. You finally woke up. Sit down and eat something. I've been feeding you some liquid food for a while. You treat Gu Fan like this too? Subai asked this question in a very embarrassing way. With Subai's emotional intelligence, it was absolutely impossible for him to make such a mistake. Haha, Suner just smiled and didn't answer the question. You can eat first. I specially prepared a dish for you that you like to eat very much. At that time, you always ate it deliciously in front of us. And we don't dare to eat it? After Suner finished speaking, he walked into the kitchen again, while Subai picked up the little guy and placed him on the dining table to make out with him. Soon, Suner walked in carrying a bowl. Dang 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 dang. Suner ceremoniously placed a portion of roasted brains in front of Subai, and said proudly, "How about it? You can't eat authentic Sichuan-style roasted brains here. I specially checked it from the internet. Learned from recipes." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 178. Suner is very satisfied with her craftsmanship. In fact, cooking is also a very enjoyable thing for women, especially the food prepared for her beloved man. She has poured her love and thoughts into it. Subai lived in Chengdu for a long time when he was young. He came to the eastern coastal area to study and live alone after his parents passed away. Therefore, his taste is more Sichuan. Therefore, sooner specially I cooked a meal for Subai that was more like Chuan Cai. However, when Subai saw Neahua being solemnly placed in front of him, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief, suppressed an impulse, then left the table and walked step by step to the bathroom. Suner was stunned on the spot, and then heard the sound of vomiting in the bathroom. He looked very embarrassed, and at the same time, there was a hint of sullenness. It didn't count him irritating himself about Gu Fan first. It was so hard to cook a meal for him. To actually respond to yourself in this way? The little guy looked in the direction of the bathroom and listened to the sounds coming from there. He actually followed suit, turned around, lay down, put his hands to his mouth, and started shouting "Oh, oh, oh" too. This action amused Suner. She stretched out her hand and rubbed the little guy's cute nose. "You little brat, you don't learn the good things but the bad ones learn so quickly. Come on, if he doesn't eat, we will eat." Suner sat down next to the little guy, took a small bowl, filled it with some custard, added some rice, stirred it, and fed it to the little guy's mouth with a spoon. The little guy liked being fed by others. He couldn't help but sit there with his mouth open and eat one bite after another. After Subai recovered and walked out, he waved to Suner with some embarrassment, "I'm a little allergic to brain flakes recently." Suner ignored Subai and continued to feed the little guy. Subai sat down at the dining table. He really had no appetite. He had been in a coma for several days and hadn't eaten much, so his appetite was pretty good. However, after seeing Neahua, his stomach started to spasm. It was really like this recently. White flowers of food give yourself too much horror. Except for the little guy who ate happily, the rest of the meal seemed a little lukewarm. Suner fed the little guy, tidied up a little and left without saying goodbye to Subai. This actually made Subai feel that she was too ignorant. If she had known better than to provoke her with Gu Fan's incident at the beginning, maybe the misunderstanding would not have expanded later. She poured herself a glass of red wine and sat on the sofa. Down. The little guy was full and energetic, playing alone on the carpet. To be honest, Subai now felt that if he brought this little guy up, he might not want to have another child related to him by blood. The little guy was too obedient and sensible. If he really wanted an ordinary child kids, it's not that easy. Moreover, I don't know how long I can live and what kind of child I want. The little guy was brought out of the story world by himself. The two of them are dependent on each other. This is considered a special situation. Taking out his mobile phone, Subai started to check the air tickets, and then booked a flight ticket to go back tonight. Perhaps, the only thing he could really accomplish in London was to have a meal. Edward may have really interacted with his father, but Subai didn't want to stay in London anymore. The facts were already clear. In the past, he could indeed travel around according to his mood. Now, because of his identity as an audience, it was already very inconvenient, especially since Subai knew that Lychee was not in the real world at all. She had told herself that she would leave for a long time. It was already a lot of luck to successfully sing Empty City Plan once. If she wanted to do it again and again, it's really a bit too whimsical to keep singing. After returning to China, Subai plans to arrange some lawyers or private detectives to investigate the matter. The effect may be much better than doing it himself. In the afternoon, Subai watched TV with the little guy in the hotel, and then took a nap. When he woke up, he looked at the time and thought it was almost time to go to the airport. He found an unread message on his phone, which was sent by the monk. Come. The content of the message is, do you have time to come to Qinhuangdao? If Subai remembered correctly, when he left Sichuan, the monk was still sleeping with Gyatso at the Josegu Hotel. But now they have arrived in Qinhuangdao. I don't know that the monk did not take a good rest during this hard-earned holiday. Why are you running around all over the country? While getting dressed, Subai replied with a message, what's going on? To be honest, Subai didn't want to have too much interaction with the monk in real life. It was too tiring, and the monk's palace was a bit too deep. Subai was a little tired of this feeling of scheming against each other, and maybe he would make another one. The mentally ill person just breaks up with the monk and fights again, why bother? However, the monk's matter seemed to be really urgent, and he sent a voice request directly to Subai. Amitabha Subai put his hands together and recited the Buddha's name. Then he looked at the little guy sitting on the sofa who seemed to be very curious about his appearance. The little guy was still in a learning and imitation stage. Subai, I have something to ask you for help. Let's make it clear first. Subai lit a cigarette, and in his heart he had already decided that no matter what pie the monk drew, he would reject it. The poor monk catching something here in Qinhuangdao is not a realistic task, but this thing is of great benefit to us. I'm sorry, my leg is broken and I can't go. After Subai finished speaking, he hung up the phone directly. He was too lazy to go all the way to Qinhuangdao to mess around with the monk. He might not get any benefits in the end, it was too tiring. Let's go back home. Subai picked up the little guy from the sofa and gave him a kiss. The weather in Shanghai has not been as hot as before in the past 2 days. After all, it has entered autumn, and it has been mainly cloudy and light rain these days. The weather that originally wanted to make citizens shirtless suddenly forced citizens to start wearing long clothes. Sleeves. Subai has been back to his villa in Shanghai for nearly a month. During this time, he arranged for several groups of people to go to London to help him investigate the Edward Institute. He even participated in sponsoring the Edward Institute of Psychology. There has been a lot of progress, but some specific detailed reports are not expected to be released for a while. During this month, Subai lived a very regular life. He didn't meet anyone or travel far. During the day, he read books and drank tea at home in the morning, exercised in the gym in the afternoon, and went to a nearby hotel in the evening. The shooting club practices firearms. Many firearms and items in this club are actually prohibited by the state. However, the owner of the club is relatively powerful, and the people who have VIP cards here are all rich and noble people, so all aspects are open to the public. He closed his eyes, but the difference from others playing with guns was that Subai asked for all kinds of shotguns by name, which really cost the boss a lot of effort. Fortunately, Subai didn't care about the price. There is no way, why is the weapon Subai relies on most now is the Hellfire shotgun, and he can't practice with the Hellfire shotgun. He can only find some ordinary shotguns with similar firing effects and feel to practice on his own. Training, Hellfire shotgun bullets are too expensive. If you can improve your shotgun skills, it will be of great benefit in the future. Basically, it was already late at night when I came back from gun practice, so I took a shower and went to bed. This kind of regular life made Subai feel like he was back in school. Subai didn't go to his cousin's engagement. He happened to be in London at that time and missed it perfectly. However, Subai still had to pay the money in advance. Someone took them there, maybe my aunt and cousin thought that they would not want to meet those relatives in the end. The little guy has grown up a bit this month, and now he looks like a 7 or 8-month-old child. Because Jixiang is taking care of him, even with this careless father, the little guy is still white and fat. Now he no longer wears a belly band but wears some high-end children's clothes bought by Subai. Occasionally, Subai takes the little guy out for a walk in the afternoon. The little guy's cute appearance always attracts the attention of passers-by around him. Subai is also used to the feeling of being a father. Perhaps, Subai has to thank the appearance of the little guy for making his life less monotonous and cold. When he is with him, Subai can feel that he is a person of flesh and blood. Home people. The days passed by so casually, and one night, Subai put the little guy to sleep next to him, and Ji Xiang slept on the other side of the bed. Suddenly, the ancient clock in the bedroom that was used as a decoration suddenly stopped working. Ringed. The little guy was still sleeping soundly. Jixiang opened his eyes suddenly but didn't move, and then slowly closed his eyes again. Subai silently sat up on the bed again. 3 months. Just right. Subai's mobile phone started to operate on its own and entered a radio app, and then the familiar hoarse and deep voice sounded. To be honest, after not hearing this ghostly voice for 3 months, Subai actually missed it a little bit. Dear listeners, welcome to the horror radio program. I am the host of the program. I don't have a name, because the name here has no meaning at all. The 3-month rest period is over. It has been a long and torturous time. I believe that for most of the listeners who are used to listening to our program, you are probably a little unaccustomed to the days without our program accompanying you, right? Don't worry. Today's horror story begins soon. 20 young people, all between 20 and 30 years old, 10 men and 10 women, pretty average, right? At this time, they were all lying on their beds and getting ready to sleep, but suddenly they found that their bedroom had changed. A bloody game of order and choice. It's kicked off. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 179. With a long sigh of relief, Subai did not stand up in a hurry, but first put his hand into his sheets and touched it. At this time, the little guy and Jixiang who were sleeping next to him were gone. However, soon, Subai took out 2 Hellfire shotguns from the bed. Sure enough, you are right to be careful, Subai said to himself. Having the experience of being inexplicably transported into the story world after taking a hot spring bath with the monk and Gyatso last time, Subai now has a clear understanding of the obscene, trivial nature of the horror broadcast, so he is about to take a break from the horror broadcast. In the past few days after the broadcast was completed and restarted, Subai always put 2 Hellfire shotguns under his bed when he went to bed at night. Otherwise, when he woke up and was wearing a set of pajamas, he would inexplicably enter the story world. It's so unfair. After getting out of bed, he opened the retro wardrobe in front of him. There were clothes in it, including old-fashioned suits and casual men's clothing that were popular in Shanghai in the 1920s and 1930s. Subai chose a black coat and a pair of casual pants. And a pair of leather shoes, closed the closet door, and looked at himself in the closet mirror. Subai suddenly felt that it would be perfect if there was a BGM from Shanghai Bund around him at this time, but Su Wenqiang was not using a shotgun. Putting the two guns on his waist and hiding them, Subai opened the bedroom door. After walking out, he found that he was in a quaint hotel. There were many rooms on this floor. When Subai came out, a door opened on the opposite side. A man about 1.5 meters tall was frightened when he saw Subai. He pulled out a dagger and pointed it at Subai. Subai made a move to rush forward, but stopped in time, and his figure did not leave the doorframe. The other party was startled by Subai's move, and was so stimulated that he rushed towards Subai with a dagger. Subai did not draw his gun or fight back, but watched the other party rush over. On one side of his body, the other party's dagger pierced Subai's thigh. Subai let out a scream, then backed away suddenly and closed the door. At this time, many listeners outside opened their room doors and came to the corridor. They saw a short man holding a bloody dagger and heard male voices moaning in pain from the opposite room. The short man was a little stunned, but looking at the fearful eyes of the audience around him, he couldn't help but puff up his chest. A sense of vanity was satisfied, and then he spat towards Subai's door. "Bah, you look at something useless." Immediately, Xiao Xiao turned around and left here. Killing each other is prohibited here. Once a listener dies here, all the participating listeners will be buried together. A woman in a red dress pointed to a bulletin board in the aisle and said. Everyone also gathered around. The short man was surprised, and felt horrified in his heart. Fortunately, he only stabbed the other person's thigh and did not pierce the other person's heart. Otherwise, it would be really not worth it if he accidentally killed the other person and had to be buried with him. At this time, Subai gently opened the door and limped out, leaning against the wall. "Ah, damn it, no killing is allowed, ah ha 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 ha, no killing is allowed." Subai burst into tears of joy. It was tears of joy. Many of the audience members around him cast disdainful glances at Subai. It must be luck that such a timid and fearful person could still become an audience member. "There's a sign here, a restaurant over there," shouted a man in a vintage leather jacket. Sure enough, there was a sign at the end of the corridor, pointing to the restaurant. Everyone started to walk over there, and Subai also limped over. Subai was the last person to enter the restaurant. It was a large restaurant with a buffet style. You could take your own meals. Subai had almost recovered from the injury on his leg. After all, he had vampires in his bloodline, but he was still lame very exaggeratedly. When picking up food, he would subconsciously move away from anyone standing next to him, and his posture would be as low as possible. After taking food in a circle, Subai understood one thing, that is, everyone's aura was blocked here, and there was no way to deduce the opponent's strength from the aura. Subai took a portion of fried rice, some pickles and a glass of milk and sat down to start eating. No one spoke or chatted in the restaurant. Everyone seemed very quiet. There were 20 people, 10 men and 10 women. Yes, none of them were wrong. Obviously, everyone was just eating for the sake of eating, and everyone knew that the story world would not be too beautiful, and it was not a place for picnics. To be honest, Subai really missed the atmosphere in the story world, and he had a particularly good appetite. He basically ate all the plate of fried rice. In the end, it seemed that it was not enough, so he went to get another bowl of hot rice. 10 noodles were eaten. Even Subai himself felt a little surprised. He was really mentally ill. As soon as he entered the story world, he became energetic and radiant. The meal time was about 45 minutes. Soon, another sign appeared in the restaurant. "Please go here to the conference room." Some people finished eating first, but did not leave first. Instead, they sat and waited for most people to finish eating. They remained silent for about 5 minutes before they all stood up and continued to move forward according to the instructions. Subai had a better appetite, so he was among the last to get up. Good appetite. A woman wearing gold-rimmed glasses asked Subai as she deliberately narrowed the distance between them. The other person is around 27 or 80 years old, very intellectual, and has very fair skin. Cough cough cough. Subai coughed continuously. Oh, I'm sorry, you may be allergic to the perfume I sprayed. Haha, after all, it was a popular perfume in Shanghai in the 1920s and 1930s. I sprayed some on it out of curiosity. It's okay, my nose is a little weak and sensitive. Subai immediately apologized. My name is Su Zhenzhen, what's your name? The woman seemed to be particularly interested in Subai. Subai. Oh, I've never heard of it, Su Zhenzhen said with some regret, but now we both know each other, right? Well, Subai looked at the front and found that everyone in front had already left. He reminded, let's move forward. In the story world, it is better to follow the trend. It is best not to lag too far behind others. Follow the crowd. Su Zhenzhen nodded after listening to Subai's words. Yes, just follow the crowd. When the two people walked to the conference room together, the 18 people were already sitting in the conference room. Subai deliberately chose the least noticeable spot on the right side and sat down, while Su Zhenzhen sat down on the left side. The table was black, but at this moment, the tabletop began to float, like a puddle of liquid. A piece of paper and a pen slowly appeared. In the end, everything was restored, but out of thin air, in every seat with people sitting there. There is a list and a pen on the table. There is a line written on the paper. Who do you want to die first? Below are photos of 20 people. Under each photo there is a circle that can be checked, and there is a bracket that says, single choice. Subai couldn't help but smile a little and covered his face with one hand. People who didn't know better thought that Subai was shocked and frightened by what happened, but Subai was actually covering his mouth and laughing silently. Grass. I made a right bet. After completing real-life tasks, you must have some benefits. In addition, when Subai saw so many people gathered in rooms, a guess suddenly appeared in his mind. Subai felt that his cheeks were almost cramping from laughing, but he couldn't stop at all. Bao was so happy, and he felt like he had finally mastered the horror radio routine. At the end, Subai suddenly found that someone in front of him was looking at him intentionally or unintentionally. He immediately pinched his thigh with his other hand to stop his smile, and then took away the hand that was covering his face, with a smile on his face. A look of fear and pain. There is a main podium directly in front of the conference room. There is no host on the podium, but there is a large wall clock. On the wall clock, there is less than 1 minute left until 12 noon. Everyone began to make a choice. Obviously, at this time, everyone will tend to choose out the stronger person and let him die first, which is naturally the best for them. The rules this time are obviously the group members' own internal game. The horror radio host also said it before, is a bloody game of order and choice. Only by sending those who are stronger than you to die first will you have the greatest hope of surviving in the end. Subai silently put a tick on the short man's photo. Immediately, the paper and pen disappeared from the table. When the wall clock reached 12 o'clock, a list appeared on everyone's desktop. The photos of 20 people were on the list, and there were voting numbers below. The short man's name is Zhao Zhen, and there are 13 votes for him. Next up is Qin Yang, a young man wearing an undershirt, 1 vote. Sun Yu, a young woman wearing a white dress, 1 vote. Lu Tao, a young man wearing a black suit, 2 votes. What surprised Subai was that there were actually 3 votes under Subai's name. Excluding Zhao Zhen, the little dwarf who found out that he had been tricked by Subai and deliberately retaliated against Subai, there were 2 other people who voted for him. It seems that they are not all fools. At least there are a few smart people who can see that Subai is deliberately acting. This made Subai wake up. It seemed that this kind of weak posture to show enemies could not be used forever. He had to make himself more in sync with others. Boom. Boom. The wall clock began to ring. All 19 people's eyes fell on the short man Zhao Zhen. Obviously. Everyone is waiting for the person with the highest vote. What an ending will be like. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 180. Subai himself was also guessing what would happen to the people who were voted out. According to his idea, they should not die directly, although the previous list that required everyone to make a choice was a death list. However, if he really died directly, wouldn't it be too childish? To be honest, Subai would rather fight with real swords and guns. Even if he is killed by a stronger person or tricked, there is nothing to regret. If he really relies on this voting model, if it's obliterated, then it's a bit too cold. It was so cold that Subai couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. When the 12th tone of the wall clock rang, Zhao Zhen slowly moved his head away from his body. There was still an inexplicable look of panic on his face. The headless body was still standing there, waiting for about 7 or 8 seconds. He finally fell down within seconds. The head fell to the ground with a dull sound like a medicine ball hitting the ground. Subsequently, it was total silence. Because not only Subai, but also the rest of the people did not expect that the voting on the death list would actually be implemented immediately and become a cold fact. Zhao Zhen. Just die. He was so dead that he had no ability to resist at all, not even a cry. There was no prelude, no expression of death, not even a trace of blood splashed out. Subai stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. In fact, the thing he least wanted to see happened, because if he was chosen next, and those mentally retarded children had all voted for him, wouldn't he do you have to be erased immediately? Not even the slightest bit of room to struggle? Then what was the use of the Hellfire shotgun that I had worked so hard to strengthen myself and exchanged for it? Among the remaining 19 living people present, some were secretly happy, while others were worried. People who are secretly happy basically feel that they are not strong enough and think that this method is beneficial to them. Those who are worried are that they think that they have some strength to back them up. In this way, they feel unwilling to rely on voting to decide life and death. Of course, everyone began to subconsciously hide their emotions. Maybe they didn't understand before, but now they should all understand. After understanding the rules, shooting first has become the rule of this bloody game. Subai sat at the back with a calm expression, but there were already thousands of thoughts in his mind. He wanted to have a cigarette while thinking, but unfortunately he never said that he not only put the shotgun under the quilt but also put the cigarette and lighter together when sleeping. Under the quilt, maybe, but when I touched my coat pocket out of habit, I actually touched cigarettes and matches, old-fashioned cigarettes. Forget it, it's better than nothing. Subai took out a cigarette, held it in his mouth, and lit it with a match. At this time, a man sitting in front of Subai suddenly turned around and looked at Subai. "Brother, do you have a cigarette? Take one." Subai smiled, handed over a cigarette, and took the initiative to open a match and light it for the other party. "Thanks, buddy." The other party also took a deep breath. It seemed that he was also a long-time smoker and had a strong addiction to cigarettes. In fact, for most smokers, the craving for cigarettes will really kick in when they are at the two extremes of boredom and nervousness. It is obvious that the scene just now made most people nervous from the bottom of their hearts. "You actually have 3 votes," the other party said softly. "It's just one more vote than you," Subai responded. There were names and photos on the list before. Subai knew that the name of the person sitting in front of him was Lu Tao. There were 2 votes for him to die, while Subai had 3 votes. I'm different from you. I voted for myself. Lu Tao shook off the ashes. It proves that there is only one guy who wants me to die. You are different. You have 3. Do you know what 3 means? What does it mean? If no one does anything special before the next vote, many people's votes will be low and average, and maybe even 3 votes will become the highest vote. Why are you telling me this? At this time, people had already begun to leave the conference room, either going back to their rooms or going to the restaurant, because Zhao Zhen's body was still there in the conference room, and the game did not pick up the body, and the strong smell of blood was getting stronger and stronger. What do you think? Lu Tao pretended to be mysterious. I'm not interested. Subai stood up and threw a few more cigarettes from the cigarette case to Lu Tao. There are lit candles in the restaurant. After saying that, he turned around and left the conference room. It seems that there was a shadow of doing the task with the monk last time. Subai is now a little disgusted with this kind of very secret calculation and calculation. Although he has used it before, it is his own business to calculate in his own heart. Subai doesn't want to. He would find it very tiring and annoying to work with strangers or be wary of each other. Even if he got sick again, it would be very uncomfortable to kill Lu Tao with one shot and die together. Possible. The food in the restaurant has actually been refreshed. The buffet food here is fresh and large, basically enough for 200 people to have a meal. There are only 20 people here. No, there are only 19 people now, which is obviously more than enough. And these foods will be automatically updated, at least while the game is in progress. There is no need to worry about food issues. There were a few people sitting there drinking drinks in the restaurant, but not many people were talking, because any clique on the surface might become a thorn in others' side. See who forms a group, then the rest of the people are very likely to vote for them to die first the next time they vote, and if the number of small groups becomes larger, such as 5 or even 10 people, this does not make much sense. First of all, it is difficult to say whether this group can be formed. After all, not everyone is Adolf Hitler, who can rely on speeches to win over a large number of supporters who follow him wholeheartedly in a short period of time. When the time comes, it is very possible for people in your own group to commit suicide. The most important thing is that Subai also discovered that these 20 people, well, these 19 people, do not know each other. Obviously, this is also a point that was considered before the horror broadcast. Otherwise, if there is an old friend here or it's something like old enemies, which will affect the aesthetics and purity of the game. Subai himself didn't know when he was able to naturally think about problems from the perspective of a horror broadcaster. In fact, there was nothing he could do about it. After all, the horror broadcaster was the host of the game. Although he could not see or touch it, but if you want to survive in the story world, you must first think and look at some issues from its perspective, and try to do things according to the meaning of the horror broadcast. Back in his room, Subai lay on the bed, yawned, and then stood up again. He gently opened the door to his room. There was no one in the corridor now. Most of the people were still in the restaurant. Or in his own bedroom. Opposite Subai is Zhao Zhen's room. Zhao Zhen's body is still in the conference room, and it is estimated that it will still be there at this moment. Maybe the terrorist broadcast is deliberately to disgust people, and the body is not refreshed on purpose. I think it is certain that the conference room will continue to be used. When it is used in the future, Zhao Zhen and the body of the person with the highest number of votes will remain in the conference room, which creates a good bloody atmosphere. Subai walked out of his room. The room could not be locked. Anyone could come in. There was no locking bolt. Subai reached out and turned the doorknob, opened Zhao Zhen's door, and walked in. The layout of Zhao Zhen's room is exactly the same as Subai's own, with old-fashioned classic hotel decoration, large wardrobe, big bed, and red carpet. The quilt on the bed was not folded. Seeing this, an idea suddenly appeared in Subai's mind, that is, if there is a chance, he should secretly take a look at other people's rooms. Whoever folds the quilt neatly does not need to be as extreme as tofu cubes. Well, as long as the quilt can be folded, it should be able to explain one thing from the side, that is, even if this person suddenly enters the story world while sleeping on the bed, he is not particularly panicked, and it can be inferred that this person his strength is definitely at a higher level among the 19 people today. After all, everyone's aura is blocked here. You can't rely on sensing aura to detect the strength of others, so you can only start in this subtle way. Subai opened Zhao Zhen's quilt. To Subai's surprise, there was something in the quilt, which were several hot water bottles. It seems that in the real world, Zhao Zhen should have put the hot water bottle in the bed when he was sleeping at home. Just like Subai put the Hellfire shotgun under the quilt and brought it to the story world, Zhao Zhen's hot water bottle also came with it. Follow-up came. There was nothing special. Subai turned around and wanted to take a look at Zhao Zhen's closet. The door frame of the closet was the same as Subai's. There was a mirror. Subai even took a look at himself. Well, it's not bad. I didn't expect that I would look pretty good wearing such retro-style clothes. Immediately, he reached out and opened the closet door. There were a lot of clothes inside, including various men's styles, and even women's styles. It was the same as Subai's, but the clothes here were much smaller than Subai's. It seemed like a horror broadcast. They really consider the audience very carefully, even taking into consideration whether the clothes fit or not. Immediately afterwards, Subai began to look deeper into the closet. This dress is nice. It's an evening dress, very delicate. However, soon, Subai's eyes suddenly shrank. The sleeves of this evening gown are puffed up. Prove that these clothes are not hanging in the closet. But someone is wearing this dress and hiding in the closet. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 181. Subai slowly took out the Hellfire shotgun and pointed it at the clothes, or in other words, at the person. If you kill me, won't you die the same way? The other person spoke up, and it turned out to be a woman. Come out. The other party slowly walked out of the closet. She was a pretty good-looking woman. Subai remembered the other party's appearance. Her name should be Chen Yuxin. The photos and names of everyone had been compared on the previous list. However, this woman should have changed her clothes. Here, force is no longer the only way to solve problems. Chen Xinyi reached out and combed her hair. Her hair was chestnut and looked very gentle and comfortable. She was a woman who was good at fully displaying her beauty. I don't think so. Subai put away the gun and sat on Zhao Zhen's bed. To be honest, there was nothing to avoid here, even if the owner of this bed had just died. Oh, do you have any special ideas? Chen Xinyi sat down on a chair opposite the bed. Subai suddenly realized that he still couldn't break away from the nature of a man. When talking to Lu Tao before, Lu Tao also expressed the idea of cooperating or discussing together, but Subai directly rejected it with action. But in the face of such a beautiful woman, Subai was willing to say a few more words. It's not that he has a crush on her, maybe this is a woman's natural advantage in front of men, but there is a prerequisite, a beautiful woman. If this is not how democracy works, especially for listeners who are only good at killing and conspiracy, if it is limited to this simple and single vote to carry out group tasks, it would be too boring and boring. Chen Yuxin smiled and nodded, I think so too. Maybe this is just the first time in this simple mode. Just hit the first bird with a gun. If Zhao Zhen dies, he will die. If it continues like this so, this time the story world can directly turn into a competition of pretending to be stupid, to see who is stupid, who is a coward, and whose acting skills are good. It's just that I don't know yet what kind of medicine is sold in its gourd. Subai stood up and was about to leave Zhao Zhen's room. It should be soon. Chen Xinyi also stood up. It was obvious that she was ready to leave. She pointed at Subai. Are you leaving first or should I leave first? I'll leave first, Subai said, and walked to the door first. If two people go out together and are seen by others, and people mistakenly think that they have formed a small group, then the gain outweighs the loss. Subai turned the door handle and the door was opened. However, at this moment, the entire floor suddenly disappeared and everyone fell down. Chen Yuxin was right next to Subai, and in other directions, there were more than a dozen people falling together, whether in their own room or in the restaurant, everyone was falling. Subai's eyes exchanged with Chen Yuxin's, and both parties caught some information from the other's eyes. Sure enough, what they had guessed before was correct. The prologue of the story had just begun, and it would not be possible to get to the end by simply relying on voting to kill people. Below was the water surface, and everyone fell into the water like dumplings. Subai saw a cyclone seem to appear under Lu Tao's feet and stagnated. However, the cyclone under his feet dissipated in an instant and continued to fall. He didn't know whether it was due to the rules of terrorist broadcasts or because Lu Tao deliberately did not want to attract attention. Subai estimated that the former was more likely. Anyway, everyone fell into the water. The water surface is very deep, but the buoyancy is very strong, which ensures that people who cannot swim will not drown. There should be special substances in the water, so the buoyancy is very strong. Everyone was floating on the water, and in the distance, a blue circle of light appeared, which was a door. Everyone was a little confused. They didn't know what the horror broadcast was. Above, there was a floating house. You could also see the furniture and other things inside, but the bottom was empty. This visual feeling was like bug caused by falling into an abyss while playing the game. Immediately afterwards, the water surface began to flow, and the pressure above began to increase. At this time, there is buoyancy below the water surface and pressure above it. People in the water can only be pressed above and below the water surface. Although they will not drown, even the poorest landlubber will not drown, but no matter how good the water quality is, people will not drown. Can't swim fast. At this moment, Subai suddenly felt a hot breath coming from him. Looking around, he found that there was a roar of fire 1,000 meters away. It was a blue flame, giving people a strange impression. Feel. At this time, the first person began to swim towards the door, very slowly. Obviously, that door means a way out, and those fires, even if you look at them from a distance, you will know that even the strongest person will die if he is burned unless he reaches that extremely strong level. Everyone started swimming because no one wanted to die. At this time, the gap in strength has become apparent. Subo is in the middle because he has not made up his mind to switch to vampire state to increase his agility. The speed gap between those in front and those behind has begun to widen. The distance is also widening, and those blue flames are approaching quickly, showing no mercy at all. Subai did not rush to the front, but continued to suppress his rhythm, keeping himself in the middle position, with 7 or 8 people behind him. That was enough. Subai did not believe that the horror broadcast would kill more than half of the people in the end. Sea of fire, otherwise how can we continue to play this game if everyone is burned to death? What about the storytelling that horror broadcasts have always pursued? While Subai was swimming, he looked around and found that Su Zhenzhen and Chen Yuxin were also beside him. Grass. Subai cursed in his heart, they are all foxes. Now it seems that those who are strong enough and kind enough are probably in the middle, while the ones at the front are just stupid birds. Fire, fire! The last few people started screaming. Subai looked back and found that the fire was very close. Looking forward, there was still a long distance to the door. If things continued like this, except for the few people in front who could get in time, everyone else would be burned to death. At this moment, a woman in blue clothes opened her arms and pursed her lips, as if she was chanting something. Then, a gust of wind blew, the wind became stronger and stronger, and the direction of the wind was towards the door. Good wind relies on strength. Everyone's speed was accelerated at this time because of the push of the wind. Subai also turned his head and glanced at the woman. If he remembered correctly, the woman's name was Qian Lan. From the looks of it, she should have been strengthened by wind magic. Magic enhancement was still rare in the eastern circles. At this time, because of the wind and Qian Lan, everyone's speed was accelerated. Finally, people in front began to swim to their destination and enter the door, and people behind them immediately followed. Subai also swam to the door, jumped, and then landed on the ground, in the restaurant. Everyone was wet and drenched. Some female audience members wearing more gorgeous women's clothes were almost exposed at this time, but no one here probably wanted to care about these things, even the women themselves didn't care at all. Su Zhenzhen was a little behind Subai, and Chen Yuxin was one in front of Subai, so the three of them were still sitting together at this time. Swimming before was also extremely energy-consuming. Su Zhenzhen looked at Subai and whispered in the voice of only two people. Just now, the speed of the flames suddenly slowed down. Subai frowned slightly and did not answer. By the end, 19 people came in together and the door disappeared. All 19 people came back intact. Many audience members walked over to thank Qian Lan, about 10 of them. Subai did not go to thank him, but chose to go back to his guest room to change clothes. After taking a shower and changing his clothes, Subai didn't bother to go down for dinner. Instead, he lay directly on the bed and prepared to rest, with 2 guns placed by the bedside. Subai really fell asleep. This sleep was not very solid. He woke up several times, but he finally slept intermittently until the next day. When the sun shone in from the window, Subai opened his eyes and saw a few words written on the sheets. Please go to the restaurant to dine. Pervert. Subai condemned this method of notification, stood up, cleaned himself up, opened the door to the room, and walked to the dining room. At this time, there were many people in the dining room, and everyone was having breakfast. There were several people sitting next to Qian Lan. Obviously, after yesterday's incident, Qian Yan's popularity and favorability increased rapidly. 2 women, Su Zhenzhen and Chen Yuxin, were actually sitting with Qian Lan. This surprised Subai. Then, another instruction sign appeared on the pillar of the restaurant. Please go to the conference room. Everyone who had eaten started to get up and go to the conference room. Everyone knew what was going to happen. Su Zhenzhen deliberately walked with Subai, just like when she first entered the conference room. From the end of yesterday's meeting to now, many people are connecting with each other, and many people have conflicts. This vote is interesting, Su Zhenzhen said. Are you testing me? Subai asked. Why do you keep getting closer to me? Be careful that I surrender to you. Su Zhenzhen rolled her eyes at Subai, and the 2 of them sat as they did yesterday. As usual, the death list appears on the table. There are still 20 people on the list this time, but Zhao Zhen's profile picture is gray. Subai took a second look at Qian Yan's photo, and then casually put a check mark under Su Zhenzhen's profile picture. Then the list merged into the table. Immediately afterwards, the voting record paper appeared. Subai picked up the paper and looked at it. There are still 3 tickets under my photo, and I don't know which 3 mentally retarded children want to die on my own. Under Su Zhenzhen's photo is a ticket. Well, Subai voted for it and it didn't run away. Lu Tao has 1 vote in his name. It seems that he did not vote for himself this time. Qin Yang, 1 vote. Sun Yu, 1 vote. These 2 are the same as last time. Finally, Subai sighed. Qian Lan, 12 votes. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 182. Qian Lan got 12 votes. To be honest, this was not a surprise to Subai. It was even reasonable. In fact, Subai originally wanted to vote for Jian Lan, so he looked at Jian Ian's photo a few more times when voting, but in the end he still voted for Su Zhenzhen according to his previous joke. Subai didn't bother to do this. When the voting game enters the second round, with the first round as a basis and familiarity, everyone should have their own calculations and ideas in the second round of voting, and there will also be a buffer period to think about it. How to choose for a long time, and who should choose to die first in order to effectively preserve oneself. The reason why the horror broadcast designed the plot of falling into the water and setting on fire before escaping is to further promote the development of the plot. Otherwise, if everyone is either eating in the restaurant or resting in their own rooms without any disturbance, it will be difficult to win one person's vote. To get higher, it must do something to make one of the people's votes higher, very, very high, to the point where everyone wants you to die. Otherwise, if he continues like this, the probability of Subai's death is very high, because he has 3 votes in 2 consecutive rounds, and his photogenic rate is still very high. In the first round, he was the second highest, and in the second round, he was still the highest. The second highest person. Once it reaches the third round and Gu Jing is extremely calm, some people will probably subconsciously choose the person who has been firmly in the second highest place before. After all, people will feel that since this person has always been ranked second, there will always be someone. Although he didn't know the reason, he still let him die. Moreover, the number of votes may be very even by then, and it will be difficult to get more than 10 votes. Then Subai will easily top the list. Adding interest to the story is the consistent pursuit of horror broadcasting, so after entering the world of this story, Subai, who had always been extremely grumpy, subconsciously began to be low-key and moderate. Of course, it was also because the current development of things had not stimulated Subai. Bai's bottom line, otherwise Subai will go crazy in the end, knowing that killing people here will lead to death, but he still has to support a few people. It's really hard to say. After all, Subai did this kind of thing that harmed others and was not beneficial to himself. Not once or twice. In yesterday's scene, Jian Lan used her wind magic to help many people. Most of the people benefited from her and were not burned to death. But this is not a street community. She helps others and helps clean. Then everyone thanks you and sends you a banner. This is a story world of life and death, and the thinking patterns of all listeners are based on their own interests. No one wants a figure with high prestige and gratitude to many people to appear at this time. Even if they are indeed grateful to Jian Lan, even if they also have a good impression of Jian Lan, this does not affect their vote. Give money blue. Because most people subconsciously feel that the more support and gratitude Jian Lan receives, the greater her influence, and the greater her chance of survival. She even manipulates her own supporters to vote for others. The greater the influence, the lower the mortality rate, and the harder it is for others to die. To a certain extent, the probability of one's own death will increase invisibly. In short, many people have noticed that Jian Lan possibly a threat to myself, I subconsciously voted for her. There is a saying from the ancients that etiquette can only be understood in the warehouse. Only when people are well fed and have better living conditions can they understand etiquette, and only then can those good moral codes of conduct be established. It is not unreasonable for unruly people to come out of poor mountains and rivers, but in this world, in the story world, everyone will have a sense of precariousness. Here. No morals. No etiquette. No Thanksgiving. It's only you and me who live and die. Jian Lan made a wrong calculation. Subai knew clearly that Jian Lan actually wanted to take a risk and win everyone's favor. It was a kind of gamble. If her gamble succeeded, then she would have established her status as a neutral and good person. In the subsequent voting, the probability of her being voted to death is very low. She may think that she has a high chance of winning the bet, so it is a timely help, right? But Subai, who was accustomed to thinking from the perspective of the inherent evil of human nature, knew that the probability of her losing the bet was greater. She was too aggressive, and in the end, she fell into the trap. None of the people who can appear here are good people. According to the positioning of good people in the real world, here are all scum and bad people, otherwise they would not be alive today. Qianlan stood up blankly, her eyes full of disbelief. When she saw the voting results, she almost collapsed. She did not expect such an ending. Many people did not dare to look at Qianlan at this time because they felt guilty in their hearts, and they did not dare to look Qianlan directly in his eyes. Man is actually a very strange creature because of his complexity. Just like heinous murderers, they are not thinking about how to do evil 24 hours a day or 365 days a year. Maybe they will also give some money to beggars on the roadside when they see them. Donate some money to some donation projects. Therefore, these listeners who invested in Qianlan are not hard-hearted, so they will also feel guilty. They can be considered to have conscience, or at least have a bottom line. However, they cannot be as free and easy as Sudbai's psychotic thinking mode. Others did not dare to look at Qianlan, but Sudbai held his chin in a leisurely manner, ignoring Qian Ian's gaze and observing Qianlan, because Sudbai thought it was very interesting. At this moment, Qian Ian's feelings still showed that she was too naive. At the same time, Sudbai also discovered that Qian Ian's body could no longer move. It should be that Qianlan was restricted after the voting results came out. With such a degree of freedom, even if she wanted to go crazy and kill people to vent her anger, she couldn't do it. Although she was not weak, she was far from strong enough to challenge the rules. Sudbai also understood this. At least he knew one thing. If he knew that he was likely to be voted high in the next round, he must kill someone he didn't like before he voted. The guy was holding back. He couldn't wait until the voting results came out, otherwise he wouldn't even have the chance to make a final splash. Next moment, Qian Ian's limbs began to fall off. The parts that fell off were neat without bleeding. The limbs fell down and hit the ground. His whole body turned into a human stick. Then Qianlan died with a look of resentment. A very cruel way to die, a very tragic way to die, a way to die that makes one's scalp numb. Sudbai couldn't help but stretched out his tongue and licked his lips. The fresh smell of blood was very intoxicating. He even wanted to applaud for the variety of rule-based killings in this story world. How interesting, how fun, to see a person who obviously saved people and did good deeds die in such an extremely cruel way. The taste of irony is so strong that it can almost turn into water drops. This is almost like smoking those who were beaten before. Qianlan helped and then gave the person who voted for Qianlan a hard slap. However, Sudbai still restrained this impulse. Now he has 3 mentally retarded babies who have thrown themselves to death every time. Although Sudbai himself doesn't know why, he doesn't even know who it is. If he claps and slaps him again at this time, then with the face of helping others, if a few people vote for themselves in the next round with a grudge, then Sudbai is really hungry and may become the top vote winner in the next round and enjoy the same treatment. Sudbai didn't want to die, especially in such an extremely useless way. Letting these scum decide his life and death was an insult to Sudbai. Mental patients also had to have dignity, right? He stood up and took out a cigarette. The person was dead and the meeting was over. Sudbai lit the cigarette with a match and was the first to walk out of the meeting room. People started to come out one after another from behind. "Brother, have another cigarette," Lu Tao patted Sudbai on the shoulder from behind. This was a very offensive behavior, a very irrational behavior, and also a wanton behavior. It seemed that Sudbai was sure that he did not dare to take action at this time, and did not dare to kill people here. The corner of Sudbai's mouth twitched, and he resisted the instinctive self-defense counterattack. Instead, he threw a cigarette on the ground, and then stepped on it with his foot. The whole movement was smooth and natural. Lu Tao's expression suddenly changed and he became very embarrassed. He did not expect that Subai would be so decisive towards him. Subai continued walking without looking back. Lu Tao's face remained uncertain for a while, then he left. Back in his room, Subai pulled out a chair and sat beside the bed. There was nothing outside the window, no scenery, no wind, and no sunshine. It was completely dark. No one dared to try to go out, because this was something that clearly violates the rules of the story world. Lighting one cigarette after another, Subai's brows went from frowning to relaxing. 2 Hellfire shotguns were placed in front of him, but they seemed meaningless. At this time, Subai's door knocked. "Can I come in?" The voice was very low, and it was a woman's voice. "Get lost," Subai replied. The other party fell silent, and then the footsteps gradually faded away, and he must have left. In fact, there is a kind of reverse thinking. Subai can reversely infer that he has been fixed on 3 tickets for 2 consecutive rounds, and wants to kill himself for no reason? Why? They stole the ticket for themselves first, there must be resentment, there must be a reason. At least. You have to be curious, right? So, after entering this story world, who has ever taken the initiative to approach me? Lu Tao, Chen Yuxin, Su Zhenzhen, and the dead Zhao Zhen are not counted, but the probability of the first 3 names is almost over 80%. Since you have sincerely insisted on voting for me, why do I still need to give in to you? Aren't I being a bitch? Subai put out the cigarette butt and put his hands on his face. He suddenly felt an ominous premonition because he felt that he was about to got sick. From the face exposed between the 2 hands, you can see Subai smiling. Smiling wildly, with a bit of ferocity. But Subai was crying inside. He suddenly felt that the impulse was beginning to control him again. When you shouldn't be sick. Got sick. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 183. Subai faced the mirror in the bathroom, kept scooping up water with both hands, and slapped it on his face. He needed to calm down. He needed to calm down very much. He had to calm down. However, in my heart, the thoughts and impulses that are ready to move are still constantly impacting my rational defense line. However, Subai didn't want to die, really didn't want to die, but he couldn't restrain his inner desire. The rules and regulations in this story world. People who cast their 3 votes in 2 consecutive rounds. I might be voted to death by those rubbish votes. Scene after scene. Layer by layer. It kept stimulating the nerve deep in Subai's heart. Just like Subai did when the monk wanted to take him to protect the fox after the monk plotted against him, sometimes he got irritated and felt that it would be too much trouble to continue doing this and it would be too depressing for him. He will decide. Turn over the table. However, here, if you kill someone, you must die, and you will be wiped out. Subai does not think that he is qualified to fight against the rules of this story world. However, Subai still couldn't control himself. His hands began to tremble, but his face slowly became extremely calm. The cold eyes revealed a calmness at this time, but it was more like the terror and depression before the storm. Sooner or later, it will be my turn, and very soon. Subai looked at himself in the mirror and talked to himself. Would you choose to die without the ability to resist like Zhao Zhen and Qian Lan, or should you choose to indulge yourself before death? Subai paused, and finally smiled at himself in the mirror. I choose the latter. He walked out of the bathroom, holding 2 Hellfire shotguns in his hands. Subai opened the door of his bedroom. He couldn't kill everyone. According to the rules, after he killed one person, he would be wiped out. However, Subai didn't have no target to kill. Yes, he has goals. Lu Tao, Chen Yuxin, Su Zhenzhen. These three people are his goals. Subai now wanted to kill someone. His desire for the pleasure of killing could no longer be denied, resisted, or slowed down. The most painful thing about this damn story world for Subai was that it actually suppressed the audience's instinct to kill. Damn rules, damn rules. After walking out of his room, Subai didn't know where Lu Tao, Chen Yuxin, and Su Zhenzhen's rooms were, but there was no need. He didn't want to be a detective and slowly search for and watch for clues, nor did he want to follow them back to observe during lunch. In this state, Subai seemed crazy no matter what he did. I want to kill someone. I want to kill someone. I want to kill someone. Screams rang out in Subai's heart. The horror broadcast was stopped for 3 months. It was okay at first, but in the next month, Subai was really scratching his heart. The smell of killing, the pleasure of death, and the robbery. Joy, he has missed it for a long time. But unfortunately, this story world actually allows the audience to be like monks, pretending to be cowardly, moderate, and shrinking their edges. Some people want to die on their own. I can't kill them yet. Frustrated, helpless, and unwilling, the beast deep in Subai's heart finally reared its head. At this time, Subai's eyes had already turned red. This was not a crazy red, but a cold and calm red, which meant that Subai now looked very calm, so calm. Feel intimidated? Chen Yuxin, where are you? Subai stood directly in the aisle and shouted. His voice was loud. Subai recalled the woman who came to him before and felt that the tone and style were more like Chen Yuxin. Of course, it didn't matter whether it was her or not. What Subai wanted now was a vent. The doors of many rooms were opened, and someone poked their head out. Obviously, they could not understand the sudden behavior of shouting. Although they had only entered the story world for 2 days, everyone seemed to be subconsciously used to not even speaking. He lowered his voice for fear of attracting others' attention. A door was opened, and Chen Yuxin walked out. She changed her clothes again. It was a blue shirt, which should be men's, but it had a strange beauty on her body. Found it? Subai walked towards Chen Yuxin, with the Hellfire shotgun drawn out. The 2 guns were hanging in his hands. His pace seemed very casual, but the almost crazy aura had already revealed in the hearts of those watching this scene. With huge doubts. There are really people. Dare to fight here? Chen Yuxin is not stupid, on the contrary, she is very smart. When she saw Subai walking towards her, she immediately went back to the house and closed the door. But all the doors here cannot be locked, and there are no door cards. Just turn the door handle to open it. Subai reached out to grab the door handle. The door handle was turned down, but the door was not pushed open. It was obviously Chen Yuxin. Over there against the door. Subai pointed the gun at the door without hesitation, and then pulled the trigger. Subai went crazy, depressed, and crazy. Hellfire shotgun bullets were so expensive, yet he actually used them to blast the door. Boom. There was a muffled sound, and the entire door was shattered. Chen Yuxin, who was leaning on the door, flew out and landed on the ground. Her body was dripping with blood and covered with wounds. No matter how beautiful a woman was, she would not be beautiful if she was treated like this. However, Subai staggered and fell to his knees. A huge wound appeared on his chest, which was extremely painful. Wrong. Impossible. Subai's memory began to come back. He thought about what happened after Zhao Zhen stabbed him that day. He found that Zhao Zhen had no obvious abnormality and did not appear to be injured. Why did he shoot Chen Yuxin and his body at the same time? Are there equal injuries? However, when I think about Chen Yuxin's wound on her back, and her own wound on her chest, although the degree of injury is the same, the location of the injury is different. It is very possible that the injury after Zhao Zhen stabbed herself in the leg was the same. For other parts of his body, Zhao Zhen chose to show off his injuries and not dare to let others see his injuries and weakness, so he kept trying to pretend that nothing was wrong. Of course, when Zhao Zhen stabbed Subai, Subai's muscles were prepared in advance, so the wound was not serious, and therefore Zhao Zhen's injury was not serious either. "You're crazy. You're crazy. Subai, you're crazy, you're really crazy." Chen Yuxin screamed hysterically. Subconsciously, a purple-red whip appeared in her palm, and she staggered to her feet. However, even if Subai shot and wounded her first, she still did not immediately launch a counter-attack against Subai, because the injuries were equal. How much she hurt Subai, she would be equally hurt. At this time, taking out his whip was just an instinctive reaction. Many people came closer, not daring to get too close, but this lively scene and drama really made the other audience members here feel very curious. Is anyone going to fight? This is the result of the fight. Hurt each other? Subai didn't care about his injuries. He grinned and smiled, then raised both guns and pointed them at Chen Yuxin. "You voted for my death, right?" Subai asked. "I didn't, you unreasonable lunatic." Chen Yuxin screamed. "Oh, no," Subai said slowly, "well, I believe it." Boom. Shot fired. Still Subai. Chen Yuxin rolled up her whip and quickly formed a circle of light, but the demon-breaking properties of the Hellfire shotgun were very strong, which directly exposed the veins in Chen Yuxin's arms and caused blood to flow out. Subai's feet also buckled and he knelt down on one knee. "You crazy person." Chen Yuxin whipped her whip directly, but Subai did not resist. He even closed his eyes and opened his arms, ready to welcome him. Snapped. The whip hit Subai hard. Subai was thrown backwards and hit the wall. A horrible grooved wound appeared on his chest from the neck down to the crotch, dripping with blood. Extremely terrifying. Chen Yuxin also let out a scream immediately. 3 claw marks appeared on her back, with bones visible, and she knelt down. "You madman, damn it, you madman, why don't you go find someone else, why are you looking for me?" Pap, tap, tap. Subai, who was in embarrassment and dripping with blood, slowly stood up against the wall. The gun was still firmly in his hand. He limped towards Chen Yuxin with the gun pointed at Chen Yuxin. "Tell the truth, after all, it was you who voted for me." At this time, among the onlookers were Su Zhenzhen and Lu Tao, as well as other people who had hidden themselves deeply, but coincidentally, after seeing the previous scene, they also lost the indifference they had maintained for a long time. It seems very difficult to accept. Isn't this a blatant confrontation? Blatantly violating the rules. Blatantly, perish together? Chen Yuxin suddenly laughed, and then looked at Subai seriously. "Subai, if we really want a duel as equals, I will torture you to death." "Oh, I believe it too," Subai said lightly. Boom. Another shot. This shot hit one of Chen Yuxin's legs directly. One of Chen Yuxin's legs exploded immediately, and one of Subai's arms also exploded. But luckily, there was still a Hellfire shotgun in one hand. Chen Yuxin went completely crazy. "It's how I voted for you. It's how I voted for you. When you first induced Zhao Zhen to attack you, you deliberately acted cowardly from the beginning. You knew the rules of this story world before you entered this story world, right? Do you really think that others are blind and you are the only smart person?" After getting the answer he wanted to know, Subai nodded and put a pillow on his back before he died. Fortunately, he chose the right pillow. However, just when Subai was aiming at Chen Yuxin's head and preparing to shoot, the whole building suddenly shook, and immediately, all the surrounding buildings disappeared. Almost in the blink of an eye, Subai found himself standing in a desert. There are two listeners at two different locations far away from me, but they are not Chen Yuxin, because they are standing, and Chen Yuxin is not standing. Just like last time, a new scene appeared. When Subai was preparing to commit murder and suicide, this timing, it must be said, was intentional. Subai pointed the gun at the sky with his only remaining arm, and said softly with a hint of anger, "You mom pussy." Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 185. Fortunately, Subai's other Hellfire shotgun landed just 2 meters away from him. Unfortunately, Subai now only had one arm. For ordinary injuries, flesh and blood injuries, or skin injuries, Subai could rely on his bloodline to recover, but for an injury like a broken arm, Subai was not able to activate his bloodline to recover. After all, his vampire blood level is not very high. Fortunately, he can at least prevent himself from bleeding to death. Although his injuries are serious, he can still continue to live in the current environment where there is a lack of medical treatment and medicine. However, just when Subai put a Hellfire shotgun on his waist and picked up the one on the ground with his remaining hand, he keenly felt that the temperature in the desert suddenly increased. Although the temperature in the desert scene is very high, the phenomenon of sudden and abnormal rise is still very obvious. Now, it is almost equivalent to the whole person being baked by a furnace. There were even traces of burns on the surface of the skin. This is too exaggerated. Subai pursed his chapped lips and limped forward in the desert bitterly. He did not look for the two figures. First, they were far away. With Subai's current situation and ability, and what he had done before, no one in the audience would pay attention to what he did. Secondly, the two people seemed to have seen Subai from a distance and were so frightened that they ran away early. Grass. Subai cursed as he walked. If he had killed Chen Yuxin before and died in the end, it would have been over. But what the hell is this? He disabled himself and then was given up by the rules of the game in this story world. Thrown into a desert scene. However, it was probably because of the scorching sun, or because of the almost successful venting with Chen Yuxin that Subai's originally awakened inner beast gradually became silent again. In other words, Subai was still unwilling to reconcile himself to himself. He just became a passerby, and died in this damn unreal desert. Even if he wanted to die, he would have to leave the scene and then go outside to kill someone before dying. It was this strange and incomprehensible belief that kept Subai moving forward step by step. The leather shoes were already hot due to direct contact with the desert, and they also gave off a smell of burnt plastic that Subai could smell clearly. But you can't walk barefoot, you still have to keep wearing them, even if the soles are a little melted. According to the experience in the last sea scene, there should be a living door here. Subai's eyes kept wandering around, but he saw nothing except the long yellow hot sand. With a pop sound, Subai sat down under a sand dune. The sand dune was not high and could barely cover the sun. The sand below was not so hot. However, after sitting for a long time, Subai felt that his thighs and tunbu would be injured, but now he really couldn't walk anymore and needed to take a breath and rest. The Hellfire shotgun was used as a crutch by Subai. After all, one arm was now missing and it was very unaccustomed to him. It was difficult to even maintain balance when walking. After resting for less than a minute, Subai really couldn't sit still. He would be roasted if he sat down again. Subai stood up holding the gun, but immediately, Subai was stunned, and the Hellfire shotgun was fired. When it was pulled out of the sand, the tip felt a little cool. Subai reached out and touched it, and there was indeed a cool feeling. Could it be? Subai immediately lay down again, holding his hands on the sand, which immediately turned red and even started to bleed, but Subai didn't care. He even put his hand directly into the sand, and the hot sand directly burned Subai's whole body. The arm that was still in the sand was probably completely burned, but Subai's fingers really felt a coolness at the bottom. Yes, That's right, the living gate is down there, under the sand. Subai immediately pulled out his hand. The whole arm was covered in blood, but it did not drip out. Instead, it was covered with layers of sand. The blood was directly burned dry due to the scorching power, and the wound was burned into a seam. A hideous scar. Subai held a hellfire shotgun in his hand, stuffed the muzzle into the sand, and then pulled the trigger directly. Boom! The sand was exploded in a circle, and Subai himself was hit by the flying sand. It was very uncomfortable, but he had to bear it. A small sand pit with a radius of 2 meters appeared. Subai jumped in. At the bottom of the sand pit, there were wet traces. It was water, and it was very icy. It was ice water. Subai did not hesitate, and continued to point the muzzle of the gun at the bottom of the bunker, shooting again. Boom! I go. Subai only had time to utter these 2 words before he fell down. About 2 meters below the sand, there was actually a layer of ice. This directly subverted all normal people's understanding of the desert. Subai I was also caught off guard. I thought I could get some water out, but I didn't know that I fell into it. Fortunately, the height was not very high, only about 10 meters. Subai fell into the ice water. The biting coldness directly hit Subai's whole body. Almost all his body had been burned before. It felt like being roasted on fire, and now my whole body was almost frozen into a popsicle. This was simply a real experience of the 2 worlds of ice and fire, far more exciting than the service in the club. I immediately switched to vampire blood. The blood of vampires is cold and more resistant to cold, but they cannot stay in an environment immersed in ice water for long. Fortunately, in the dark place, Subai actually found an ice floe and climbed onto it. Although it was still very cold, it was much more comfortable than soaking in ice water before. Panting heavily, Subai was surrounded by darkness and there was no light at all. The sand pit that he had blasted open with his hellfire shotgun was probably filled up now. Although it is very cold now, it is at least much better than when it was almost cooked. At least, staying here will not cause an immediate life or death crisis. Subai touched his body and found the box of matches, but the matches had been soaked in water and it was impossible to light them. There was no light around him, which gave Subai a sense of crisis. Humanity's greatest fear actually comes from the unknown. Subai put his hand on the edge of the ice floe and touched the water. He found that the water surface was flowing slowly, and the ice floe was also moving with it. Now that he's moving, it's much easier to handle. At least he won't be stuck here forever, and at least he still has a place to go. Moreover, Subai, who had a thorough understanding of the rules of the game and the temperament of horror broadcasts, calmed down at this time. He simply closed his eyes and began to adjust his breathing, entering a semi-dormant state like a vampire. It is to save the heat in your body, and on the other hand, it is also to save your energy. Under a waterfall, 7 or 8 people were lying here. Many people's bellies were already bulging. It was obvious that they drank too much water before, because they were also very thirsty. Basically everyone has injuries, but they are not caused by fire, but burns. These people are relatively lucky. In fact, if this waterfall that suddenly spewed out from a location in the desert can be regarded as a point, the location where this terrorist broadcast sent 18 listeners is an ellipse with this point as the center. These 7 or 8 people are located at the 2 relatively close positions above and below the ellipse, while those including Subai are at the 2 farthest endpoints of the ellipse. Su Zhenzhen and Lu Tao were among them. Lu Tao no longer looked like the young girl he had been before, and Su Zhenzhen no longer had the intellectual eldest sister she had been before. Both of them were now lying on the edge of the pool formed by the waterfall, breathing heavily. The sun is still dazzling, the temperature is still very high, and the water from the waterfall seems to be endless, but the pool will always be this big and will not spread out. This is wrong. There are only 8 people now, and there are 10 more people who have died in the desert. Lu Tao said, "It shouldn't be, it won't be, this is not in line with the spirit of this game." Su Zhenzhen also nodded, took a deep breath first, and said, "Indeed, it is not in line with the spirit of the voting game. The first thing the rules of the story world must do is to control the number of deaths, so it stipulates that the audience is not allowed to interact with each other here. In every killing, the deceased must be chosen by vote. Therefore, when Subai wanted to kill Chen Xinyi before, he broke this rule, and the rules immediately entered a new scene to prevent Subai and Chen Xinyi from dying together, because once the audience died in large numbers outside the voting rules, the atmosphere and drama of voting in the room will be reduced, which is not what it wants to see. Haha, I guess it didn't expect that Subai would really die together. He is really a madman." Lu Tao obviously voted for Subai just like Su Zhenzhen. At this moment, a person suddenly started to cry while holding his stomach. The expressions of Lu Tao and Su Zhenzhen also changed suddenly, and then there was a terrible pain in their abdomens. This pain made people of their level unable to bear it, they subconsciously curled up and began to twitch. Anacondas began to emerge from the pool, tying the wailing listeners on the shore with their snake bodies and slowly dragging them into the pool. In addition, at this time, sand monkeys with golden hair and ferocious faces began to emerge from the sand, picked up the audience members who had been roasted unconscious in the desert, and burrowed into the sand. Middle. However, an anaconda and a sand monkey by the pool and in a desert were a little at a loss. Because. Why is one missing? In the last 3 hours, the last 3 hours of this month, if you still have a monthly ticket, vote for the dragon, hold on tight to the dragon.